So, good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, UPSC Mains 2024, Gender Studies Paper 3 Analysis. So, as like before, in this session, we have some questions which are asked in Gender Studies Paper 3, and we'll discuss them in a very detailed manner, and we'll also understand the structure of the answer and how to present the answer and what are the key points that we need to mention in this answer, so that the answer overall looks well framed, and you would score good marks if you present answer in this way. So apart from that, so yesterday itself I've told you the syllabus of this particular paper. I hope you have remembered the syllabus of this particular paper. Now if I can recall the syllabus of this Gender Studies Paper 3, now as I've already told you that economy is part of it. Apart from economy, agriculture, particularly Indian agriculture, and problems that Indian agriculture has been facing, and Indian infrastructure sector, there are a number of areas, for example ports, railways, roadways, and even waterways. Everything would be is very important, and it would be covered under the infrastructure section. And science and technology is also another area. Particularly it focuses on emerging areas of science and technology, space, defense research and developmental organization, and also defense related technologies, and even biotechnology, genetic engineering. So all these areas, a lot of questions are being asked in the past as well. And even the environment section, environment and biodiversity conservation is also another very important area which is part of this particular paper. And even disaster management is also part of this particular paper, right? So as part of disaster management, you need to read about the cyclones and cyclone proneness, the vulnerability of India to cyclones, earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides, so floods, droughts. Also all these disasters have to be read in a very detailed manner. Now apart from disaster management, internal security is another area, and from internal security also there are a number of questions are being asked. For example, when we talk about the internal security, it specifically discusses or talks about the insurgency, militancy, and Jammu and Kashmir left-wing extremism which is present in India, and money laundering, prevalence of black money, drug trafficking, arms trafficking. So all these things are part of the internal security. So as a whole, we could say that this particular paper is very broad, and apart from this paper is being broad, it is very dynamic, right? So I hope you know what is dynamic. So dynamic in the sense that the paper is mostly, the questions which are being asked in this question are mostly linked with the current affairs topics. So therefore you have to be regularly up to date with the recent current events to score very good marks in this paper. Now without any further delay, let's start the discussion of this particular paper, especially few questions. Remember, this question is from the internal security portion, right? So internal security is a very important topic within the Gender Studies Paper 3, and you could expect at least 60 to 70 marks from this particular paper itself. Now the question is, explain how narco-terrorism has emerged a serious threat across the country and suggest suitable measures to counter narco-terrorism. So this is 150 word answer, right? So I hope you knew what is narcotics, right? So narcotics is the drug abuse, right? So addiction to drugs, drug cultivation, drug trafficking, drugs trade. So everything comes part of this narcotics. So however, in recent times, the terrorist organizations or terrorist groups have direct or indirect linkages with the drug trade or the narco trade. So that is what is known as the narco terrorism. And in fact, in recent times, whether it is about militancy in Jammu and Kashmir, insurgency in the northeastern part of India, and left-wing extremism in India, so all these organizations or militant groups have links with the narco trade, and this is known as narco-terrorism. And narco-terrorism, without any doubt, because it has emerged as a serious threat across the country, and in this context suggest suitable measures to counter narco-terrorism in India. Now if you look at the approach of this question, first and foremost you need to briefly define what is narco-terrorism, right? So you just define what is narco-terrorism, and in the next part of the answer explain how narco-terrorism has emerged as a serious threat across India, and then suggest suitable measures to counter narco-terrorism, and then ultimately you could conclude this answer. So first we will try to define what is narco-terrorism, what constitutes narco-terrorism. So in fact, narco-terrorism, as I've already told you, that it is a use of organized terror to secure control over a state by another state, right? So use of organized nature of terror or terrorism to secure control over state by another state, and organize criminal networks by the insurgents or by a combination of any or all of them to achieve a fixed political, economic and social objectives based on organizational and financial empowerment through drug trafficking. However, the basis or the foundation of all these things is drug trafficking, right? So drug trafficking can ensure the financial empowerment of the militant organizations, and drug trafficking also ensures the organizational empowerment as well, right? So this is how you could briefly define what is narco-terrorism in the introduction, and then in the next part of the answer you just write narco-terrorism, how this narco-terrorism has emerged as a serious threat across the country, right? So there are number of reasons and because of which, so we could say that narco-terrorism has emerged as a serious threat across the country. So we all knew that the Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab and the northeastern part of India are highly vulnerable to the narco-terrorism or even to the drug trafficking. So in Jammu and Kashmir there are certain militant groups or militant organizations. In northeastern part of India, the insurgent groups are very often involved in drug trafficking to sustain their movements, and in fact there is a lot of global demand for the drugs, not just global demand, and even there is a huge domestic demand as well for the drugs. So because of such a huge demand, when these groups involved in drug trafficking, they used to earn a lot of revenue through the drug trafficking, particularly illegal drug trafficking. So that particular revenue would be used to finance or to fund these terrorist or terrorist activities by these organizations. So don't you think that the drug trafficking would finance, the proceeds which are generated out of drug trafficking would be used to finance their activities? So for example, proceeds from heroin smuggling. Heroin is also one form of narcotic drug, and proceeds from heroin smuggling are used to fund the separatist activities in Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Now this is not just confined to Jammu and Kashmir, so that this is a very common and regular phenomenon in northeastern part of India and certain states in the central part of India by the left-wing extremist organized groups. And in fact, the illegal drugs cultivation also has have a significant implications on the environment, ecology and biodiversity as well, right? So in fact, the war by the government, law enforcement agencies, or even for that matter civil society groups against the cultivation of drugs would be completely justified because of its negative implications on the environment alone. Because so a poppy is a one form of a drug, right? So poppy is a drug plant. So poppy growers usually cultivate this drug, they cultivate these poppy plants on the hills, right? So when they plan to cultivate these poppy drugs or drug plants on the hills, they usually clear the mountains. Now we all knew that the consequences of clearing that the natural vegetation on the hill slopes, so they contribute to floods, they contribute to landslides that we have recently seen in Wayanad, and clearing the natural vegetation also leads to the loss of biodiversity as well. So biodiversity in any ecosystem is a very important to sustain the overall ecosystem, right? So In fact, the poppy and cocoa growers, both poppy and cocoa are drug plants. So the poppy and cocoa growers further do not allow other plants to grow nearby the poppy and cocoa plants, right? So because there is a intense competition for the nutrients between the natural vegetation that was existing in the mountain land, and at the same time the poppy as well as cocoa plants. So because of that reason, very often they don't allow cultivation of other plant species, so thereby there will be no regrowth or re-emergence of natural vegetation when this poppy or cocoa plants are being cultivated. So therefore, don't you think that it leads to the erosion of natural vegetation biodiversity, and it would contribute to several natural disasters, right? Depleting groundwater tables, because the roots of the plants on the hill slopes, they hold the water together, and that would result in the gradual seepage of the water and recharging the groundwater tables. And apart from that, if the forests are cleared, if the natural vegetation on the hill slopes is cleared, that would contribute to the landslides, and that would contribute to the extreme floods, particularly flash floods, everything that we recently see a lot of landslide events, whether it is in Sikkim or certain Himalayan states such as Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand or Kerala. So all this is because of the deforestation that is being carried out. And don't forget that the narcotic drugs also have adverse implications on the health of the human beings as well, because they cause a lot of mental disorders, psychosis, and even road traffic accidents as well. Now when someone is under the influence of drugs and they go for driving, or they ride a car, they ride a bike, or they drive a car, so there is a high probability that it would lead to an accident and the death or injury of people who were traveling on that vehicles. And a lot of violence, drug overdose, suicides, and even death are the common phenomenon that we regularly observe, that whenever someone have been consuming these narcotic drugs. And if we mention some data, some relevant data with respect to the drug abuse and drug addiction, so data was provided by the World Health Organization. So according to this particular organization, so 0.7% of global burden of disease, so around 0.7% of the global burden of diseases in the year 2014 was due to cocaine and opioid use. So both cocaine and opioid are narcotic drugs. So remember, this is old data, but if you look at the new data, this number would further increase. So if you compare, if you look into the global burden of diseases, more than 0.7% of the global burden of disease is because of the cocaine and opioid use. They are narcotic drugs. And in fact, the usage of narcotic drugs also have a lot of social cost, right? So social cost, so I would explain what exactly social cost means, right? So when I say the social cost, one thing that we need to be particularly concerned about is that a lot of children, particularly the school going children, are addicted to the drugs, right? So because these drugs are easily accessible in several urban areas, particularly in lot of cities, school going children also having access to these drugs, and they are later addicted to these drugs. So it would have a lot of social cost, right? So because of drug addiction among children leads to impairment of short-term memory among children, that would impact their learning outcomes, and other intellectual faculties would also gets impacted when children are increasingly addicted to these drugs. So a poor law enforcement is one problem. So there is a poor law enforcement, right? So I hope you agree with this. So poor law enforcement is particularly because of corruption. So corruption is one reason for the same, and apart from that, there is an unholy nexus So there is unholy nexus, so that was existing between the law enforcement agencies or the groups which are involved in illegal drug trafficking. So unholy nexus, corruption, and even we very often see there is lack of political will. So lack of political will is also another major reason for the increased drug abuse or drug addiction of the people. And apart from that, so most of these drugs are carried out in an organized manner by several groups or organizations. So therefore it would be very difficult for the government to curb the drug trafficking. So even though it would be very difficult, the government of India, particularly Ministry of Home Affairs, comes with the goal of Nasha Mukt Bharat. So you just remember this, Nasha Mukt Bharat by 2047. So what is the significance of 2047? By 2047, India would be celebrating 100 years of its independence. So we are going to become Nasha Mukt Bharat or drug free India by the year 2047. So that was announced by Home Minister Amit Shah. And when we talk about the social cost of drug trafficking or increased use of drugs, so drug increases the likelihood of many kinds of criminal activity. For example, drug-related crime occurs primarily in the form of trafficking, including violent conflicts among trafficking groups. So it also results from the need of drug consumers to finance their addiction through theft and prostitution. So these are all the things which comes as part of the social cost. So when I discuss a social cost of the drug abuse or drug addiction, so learning outcomes would get impacted. Learning outcomes and increased crime rate, violence, increased crime rate in the society, and the black money and even money laundering, black money and money laundering, so would be another very important aspect, right? So all these can be considered as the social cost, or even with the increased drug addiction or drug abuse, it would lead to the wastage of the existing demographic dividend, that we have been enjoying as of now. So all these are the key factors which forms part of the social cost of drug trafficking or drug addiction. Now, what are the suitable measures that were already taken by the government to control or to counter narco-terrorism? So there is a very famous legislation, that is Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985. So this particular piece of legislation that was formulated by the Union government in the year 1985 with the aim of criminalizing the possession of illicit drugs, drug trafficking, possession of drugs, consumption of drugs. So all these things are being criminalized by the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985. And in fact, at the global level, in order to prevent the entry of illegal drugs, illegal drug trafficking into India, there were a lot of agreements that India has signed at the bilateral and multilateral level with different countries in Southeast Asia, East Asia, West Asia, with different countries, right? So there are bilateral agreements for India. Memorandum of Understanding was also signed. Joint groups on counter-terrorism and judicial cooperation with countries in the South Asian region, so were some of the efforts or the initiatives from on the part of the Indian government to prevent the entry of illegal drugs or drugs in an illegal way. And in fact, so we all knew that when we talk about the drug trafficking, drug trade, so there are two important, very important locations. In those locations, the drug trafficking or the cultivation of drug is one of the highest in the world. One is the Golden Triangle. So Golden Triangle is the region which consists of the present day Myanmar, Thailand and Laos, right? So these three countries come together, they form one of the largest drug producing regions, which is very close to India's northeastern part of India. And apart from that, there is also another region which is known as the Golden Crescent. So this Golden Crescent consists of Afghanistan, Iran and Pakistan. And because of Golden Crescent, there is increased amounts of drug abuse in the western part of India, right? So drugs are being produced, cultivated, and they are illegally trafficked into the Indian side. Now whenever you're being asked about any question on drug trafficking, you must draw this diagram, and you should also show that these two largest drug producing regions in the world have further increased the drug trafficking and illicit drug trade into India. So you could also identify certain areas in the central part of India where drugs are being cultivated and they are being sold domestically. And so apart from these, there is a need to deploy advanced technologies across India-Myanmar border as well as India, Pakistan and Afghanistan borders, right? So advanced technologies such as drones and radar systems. So that is very important, because if you look at the Golden Crescent, so most of the drugs are entering into the eastern part of India through India-Pakistan border and India-Myanmar border. So India and Myanmar used to have the free movement regime. There is a free movement regime. So I hope if you regularly follow news, you would understand what is the free movement regime. So under this, so visa is not required for the people who are residing on the border side of both sides across India-Myanmar border. But because of recent conflict and issues of illegal immigration into India from Myanmar, the central government has decided to end this free movement regime. And apart from that, there is also a need for further enhancing the fencing of the borders, including Indo-Bangladesh border, Indo-Myanmar border, Indo-Pakistan border. So if the government is unable to fence the entire borders, the government should identify certain key and sensitive areas within the borders. So therefore, so those areas can be fenced, and regular patrols through the deployment of security forces can also be carried out to prevent the drug trafficking. And apart from that, the government can also develop a comprehensive information base, right? So there will be a need for a comprehensive information base for national and international planning on the cause of drug abuse, and they can also prepare estimates of costs of drug abuse and its impact as well, and increase knowledge of drug abuse problems and also effective interventions as well. And there is a need to increase international collaboration on the drug abuse as well, because at the international level there is a need for active collaboration. So active collaboration, because drug trafficking is not the domestic problem. One country cannot do anything when it comes to the drug trafficking. Rather, there is a need for an institutional, organized, a structured way of collaboration at the global level to work on this drug abuse problem or drug trafficking. And in fact, there is also a need to further enhance awareness among the people about the drug abuse and its ill consequences or evil consequences on the individual, family and on the larger society as well, right? So all these measures have to be taken by the government to prevent or to counter the narco terrorism and the threats posed by narco terrorism to countries, the security and even the social security as well. So ultimately, in the conclusion, what you have to write: so we all knew that narco terrorism poses serious security threat to national security, and it also poses threat to public safety. And in fact, with the combination of drug trafficking and terrorism activities, addressing this complex issue requires coordinated efforts from the law enforcement agencies, governments and even the international partners to combat the root causes and dismantle the networks involved in the narco terrorism. So this is a very important thing in order to counter narco terrorism in a much more effective and an efficient manner, right? So I hope you have understood about narco terrorism and the evil or ill consequences of narco-terrorism, particularly how it threatens the national security and public safety in India, and what are the measures that have to be undertaken to successfully counter the narco-terrorism in India and even at the global level. And drug trafficking is a very important area to be focused on, so you need to read about this, and if possible you should also have some short notes on this, right? So if a question is being asked, so you can address it so without any difficulty. So the next question that we are going to discuss is about the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023. And when we talk about this Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023, so one thing that we need to understand that Supreme Court in a landmark judgment of Puttaswamy, so Puttaswamy judgment, the Supreme Court has recognized that right to privacy is part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, right? So Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So apart from this, now we are living in a digital age where through several programs like Digital India and even the global linkages because of the increased globalization, and also government efforts to bridge the digital divide which is existing in urban and rural areas between gender, male and female. So there are a lot of government efforts that marginalized a digital divide which is existing, and government has also launched a Digital India program. And apart from that, India is now emerged as the global leader in terms of digital payments. The largest number of digital payment transactions are carried out in India itself. And further globalization and even development of technology and innovation has led to a lot of transformative technologies in the digital arena. So but in recent times all these things have raised a key concern that privacy of individuals is being violated, and in fact there should be a certain limitations for the government to violate the privacy of the individuals, particularly in the context of the Puttaswamy judgment that recognized that right to privacy is part of Article 21, right to life and personal liberty of the Indian Constitution, right? So describe the context and salient features of Digital Personal Data Protection Act. So for example, I have my personal data, for example I have my financial personal data. So I'm the sole authority and I'm the legitimate authority when it comes to the usage and the protection of or even generation of my personal data. So there should be certain limitations on the government that to what extent the government can see my personal data, or even any other law enforcement agencies can have access to my personal data. So as of now we don't have any comprehensive legislative frameworks that could govern the personal data of individuals. So in fact countries like European Union and Australia have already framed their own personal data protection laws, and in this context it is very important for India to have its own digital personal data protection law. So because of this particular reason the government has framed this Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. Now we'll try to understand what are the salient features and the context why this Personal Data Protection Act is being passed. So we will be understanding about this, right? So if you want you can also go through the salient features of the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill of 2023. So now the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill or Protection Act of 2023 is a significant judgment regarding the personal data and privacy rights in India. So particularly in order to protect the personal data from being encroached upon by the private entities and even by the government, and prevent violation of the right to privacy of individuals, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act was passed in the year 2023. And in fact, as I have told you, that this act is based on the Supreme Court's 2017 Puttaswamy judgment, and 2017 Puttaswamy judgment recognized privacy as a fundamental right that I have already explained to you under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Right to privacy was recognized or identified as a fundamental right. Now, what is the context of Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023? Now, if you look at the context, the principle of consented, lawful and transparent use of personal data. Now, in fact, a lot of individuals, almost every individual generates a lot of personal data, and personal data is sacrosanct. Now, you cannot give your personal data to any other individual, any other third party, because it is very sensitive. Personal data is very sensitive. So therefore, in this context, through the Personal Data Protection Act of 2023, it is the principle of the consent of the individual to which the data is belong to, and lawful and transparent usage of the personal data of individuals is mandated through the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. And in fact, the principle of purpose limitation, for example, the government should have certain limits, any other third party or private entity should have certain limitations when it comes to the usage of the personal data. So use of personal data only for the purpose specified. For example, if the government or any other law enforcement agency has been using your personal data, so that agency must specify the purpose for the usage of your personal data at the time of obtaining consent for the usage of this personal data. So this is very, very important. And apart from that, the principle of data minimization. So when it comes to the data minimization, collection of only as much personal data as it necessary to serve the specified purpose. Okay, so only even law enforcement agencies, governments, they're not entitled or they're not empowered to collect all the personal information belong to one particular person. Rather, a collection of data which is just required to do the purpose specified. Okay, so the principle of data minimization is also involved. Principle of data accuracy. So principle of data accuracy means ensuring data is correct and regularly updated. Principle of storage limitation as well, storing data only till it is needed for specified purpose. The principle of reasonable security safeguards, and the principle of accountability is also involved when we talk about the principle of accountability through adjudication of data breaches, breaches of provisions of the bill, and even imposition of penalties for the breaches. So this is the context of Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. So you can also write this introduction as a context of introducing or bringing in this Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. Now, what are the salient features of Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023? So there are certain salient features, and salient features of this Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. Now, this particular bill is a very concise and saral. So saral means a very simple. Now, it is an acronym for simple, accessible, rational, and it is an actionable law, which is known as saral. Right, so the bill is very concise and it is a very saral, and it uses the plain language, no complicated, no complex language, so that even layman can also understand this particular Digital Personal Data Protection law very easily. And it contains illustrations that make meanings very, very clear, and it contains no provisions provided that, and it has minimal cross referencing as well. And in fact, this Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 also uses the word she instead of he for the first time. So this particular Personal Data Protection Act acknowledges women in parliamentary lawmaking as well. And apart from that, this bill also provides for following rights to the individuals as well. Now what are those rights? So right to access information about the personal data that is being processed by the governments, law enforcement agencies, and also the private entities, and right to correction and ensure erasure of the data which belong to one particular individual, and the right to grievance redressal. For example, if you are having any grievances, so those grievances could be redressed with an immediate effect. So this is also another right which is provided by the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. And right to nominate a person to exercise rights in case of death or incapacity. So all these are different rights which are being provided by the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. And in fact, so there are organizations and businesses that collect and amend and even delete the data, particularly the personal data of individuals. And in fact, these organizations, businesses, governments, law enforcement agencies, so must specify how the data will be used. So for example, if a private entity have collected my Aadhaar biometric information, so they must specify that how this data will be used, for what purpose this data will be used, and how much time that they could retain my personal data about the Aadhaar biometrics, and why this data is required to them. So everything about my personal information has to be clearly mentioned. And if I have any grievances, so this act also provides the right to grievance redressal as well. And there are certain exemptions which are being provided as part of this Personal Data Protection Act. Now what are those exemptions provided? Now if you look at the exemptions for notified agencies in the interest of security, for example, a personal data of an individual is required for the security, sovereignty, and public order. So it is very important to ensure security, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and to maintain public order in the country. So the personal information can be obtained by the notified agencies on the basis of these particular grounds. And personal information, personal data can also be collected for the purpose of doing research and even for certain statistical purposes. Now when I say statistical purposes, conducting socio-economic caste census, or doing the population census and household consumption expenditure survey. So for all these statistical purposes, personal information can be collected, and even for the purpose of research as well, the personal information can be collected. Particularly the example would be Genome India project, right? So through Genome India project, the genetic information would be studied across different genetic groups in India. So that would have a significant advantages or significant implications in terms of drug designing and drug manufacturing. And even there are certain startups or other categories of data fiduciaries or certain startups who are involved in data analysis or data processing, etc. And in fact, personal data of individuals is required to enforce legal rights and also claims as well, to perform judicial and even regulatory functions, prevent, detect, and even investigate or prosecute the offences, process in India personal data of non-resident under the foreign contract, for approved merger, demerger, and even locate defaulters and their financial assets as well. Now ultimately, in the conclusion, what you have to write, so in the conclusion, the Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 is a crucial step, or it is a very important step towards ensuring privacy and security of the personal data in the digital age. Remember, in the beginning of this particular answer, I've told you that we are living in a digital age. So there is a digital revolution that has taken place. So therefore, the digital Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 is considered as crucial and a very important step to protect individual privacy and also secure the personal data and information of individuals. So where the personal information is being leaked, and that even threatens the individual privacy and safety and security. So by setting clear guidelines and also holding organizations accountable for the protection of sensitive information, this legislation aims to build trust and confidence in the digital economy. So that is ultimately the need of the hour when it comes to the personal data protection. And next very important question is about the labor codes, labor security or security of the larger workforce. Now we all knew that the union government in the year 2020 has introduced 4 labor codes, right? So labor codes are labor reforms, because in 1950s and 1960s we have introduced several legislations for the protection of labor or protection of workforce. For example, providing them with the social security and providing them with the better wages. So all those legislations were introduced way back in 1950s and 1960s. But recently the government, in order to enhance the environment of ease of doing business in India, has introduced new labor codes, 4 new labor codes, right? So what are those 4 new labor codes? Social security, a labor code on social security, a labor code on wages, a labor code on industrial relations, and labor code on certain benefits for the woman as well, right? So the question is, discuss the merits and demerits of 4 labor codes in the context of the labor market reforms that are being carried out in India, and what has been the progress so far in this regard. So this question has 2 parts when you are writing answer. So first and foremost, what you have to do, you need to write about the labor codes in a very brief manner in the introduction. So when it comes to the social security, there are certain legislations which were passed in the 1950s, 1960s and 70s also. So you can also go through these legislations, because whenever there is a question is asked on the labor reforms, so it would be always advisable to write these legislations, write these laws in the answer. So what should be the approach of this question? So firstly, you need to write about these labor codes and then define labor market reforms in India and discuss the merits and demerits of 4 labor codes in the context of labor market reforms, and then discuss the progress in this regard, so far the progress that has been achieved. Okay, so and in fact, when we talk about the legislations which aimed at labor reforms in India, in the year 1948, immediately after independence, the Union government has passed the Minimum Wages Act of 1948. And this Minimum Wages Act has provided for the establishment of minimum wage rates for the workers who are working in different industries. Now, apart from this particular legislation, in the decades of 1950s and 1960s, the Union government has also introduced several other labor laws as well. So those labor laws including Payment of Wages Act, the Industrial Disputes Act, and the Employees State Insurance Act. So all these laws, all these different laws were introduced by the Union Parliament in the year 1950s and 60s. Now, what is the objective of bringing in those laws? The objective is labor reforms. Objective is labor reforms, protecting interests of labor or workforce, and further securing the rights of labor. Further securing the rights of labor. So we can say that these rights were more in favor of the workforce instead of the industries, because of the conservative or the protectionist attitude that we have adopted towards the foreign investments and even the private sector presence in the Indian industries, right? So all these legislations were introduced way back, and in fact these legislations provided a range of protections for the workers, including right to fair wages, right to dispute resolution, and even social security benefits such as health insurance and even pension as well. Now in the next part of the answer you need to write, so what are the merits and demerits of 4 labor codes in the context of labor market reforms in India, right? So there are certain merits and demerits with respect to 4 labor codes in the context of labor market reforms. So what are those merits? So if you look at the merits, ease of hiring and firing. For example, if there is an industry A and this particular industry employs up to 300 employees, so right, so it hired up to 300 employees, or 300 employees have been working in this particular industry A. So the industrial relations code as one of the labor code, it allows the company A to lay off or fire 300 employees, up to 300 employees, without the government approval. So earlier government approval was required to fire or lay off employees in the company, but the industrial relations code has actually made certain changes that a company can lay off up to 300 employees without the government's approval. So don't you think that such a thing would benefit the industries, and that would be seen as a positive a positive step by the government, and that would also boost ease of doing business. So that would boost ease of doing business in India. And apart from that, there will be a fixed term employment as well. So companies can easily hire workers on fixed term contracts, so that would provide flexibility while ensuring workers benefits as well, right? So balancing the workers benefits with the interests of the employer or interests of the employees, so that would again boost ease of doing business as well. And in fact the labor codes provide a greater protection and benefits for the workers, and the greater protection and benefits for the workers including minimum wages, social security benefits, grievance redressal mechanisms. So all these things are being provided by the labor codes or reformed labor codes, and certainly without any doubt, so all these reforms which are being introduced through the labor codes would improve the ease of doing business. Now what does it means when we have a higher ranking of ease of doing business? So that means we have a conducive environment for the investment, so that it would attract more and more foreign direct investment into India, and that would result in boost of manufacturing, boost of exports, and that would also create gainful employment opportunities in India. And that is a very important for a healthy economy, because that would substantially reduces income inequalities, because majority of the people are getting employed, and in fact that would also results in economic growth, economic development, and as well as inclusive growth as well. Now what are the demerits? These labor codes have certain demerits as well, so they are not free from the disadvantages. There are also certain demerits as well. Now what are those demerits? For example, if you look at these labor reforms, there are certain delays in the implementation of these labor codes. So the implementation process is very often delayed, because the states are yet to finalize their rules under these codes. So they not yet finalized the rules under these codes, and they also introduce certain changes in the IT systems. So implementation of new labor codes may necessitates significant changes on how companies can manage employee data and even track compliance. In all these areas, there are a lot of changes that have to be brought in with respect to the IT systems. And these four labor codes have amalgamated several laws into one single law. So for example, the wage code, the social security code, the occupational safety, health and working conditions code of 2020, and industrial relations code. So all these codes, these are four codes which were introduced by the union government in the year 2020, and a lot of legislations which were previously existing were amalgamated into these four labor codes. So we could say that the codification of labor laws, or bringing in labor reforms in India by the government by amalgamation or merging several different labor laws. And what is the progress so far in this regard? Now if you look at the progress that is being made in this regard, now it is very important for the draft rules to clearly state how the applicability will unfold with respect to the migrant and informal workforce. So these labor codes to some extent are silent, so with respect to the application of these labor codes to the migrant workers. So therefore there should be a more clarity on this, right? So how these labor codes would be applicable for the migrant workers, because the government scheme of One India, One Nation, One Ration card, so one nation and one ration card, where migrant workers can get the benefits of the fair price shop, the public distribution system in any state. For example, imagine that there is a family which is based out of Bihar, but they migrated to either Punjab, Haryana or Delhi as a construction workers. So they can also get the food grains entitled to them from the fair price shops in that particular state. So that is known as One Nation, One Ration card. So that was a step in the right direction. So in a very same way, these labor codes should also be more clear when it comes to their applicability to the migrant workers. And there is also need to recognize the invisible labor which is present. So for that, a national policy for the domestic workers need to be brought in at the earliest to recognize their rights and also promote better working conditions as well. Now skilling under the CSR expenditure is also other very important aspect. That's when we talk about the skilling under very CSR is corporate social responsibility. So I hope you knew about this corporate social responsibility. It means that every private industry with a certain sum of revenue has to contribute or has to spend around 2% of the total revenues on various social developmental activities such as poverty alleviation and gender equality, women empowerment, rural connectivity, drinking water, agriculture, irrigation. So all these are different areas, and the companies as part of their CSR obligations would improve those different areas that we have just discussed. And in fact, skilling, upskilling, reskilling would also comes as part of the CSR activity of the companies. So there is a need that large corporate houses should also take up the responsibility of skilling people in the unorganized sector under their CSR activities. Now in fact, if you look at the total number of people who are formally skilled in India is close to 4.5%, in contrast to countries like China, where around 48% of the population are being skilled, and in contrast to South Korea, where 94% of the people are skilled, in contrast to Japan, where 86% of the people are skilled. So you can look at the number of people who are formally skilled, it is just 4.5%. So therefore, not just the government but rather different stakeholders need to engage or involve in skilling individuals, and that is the best way to use the existing demographic dividend and achieving inclusive growth. And ultimately, in conclusion, the four labor codes are major reforms, and these four labor codes simplify India's labor laws, and they also promote ease of doing business and expanding the social security to more and more workers. So in this context, a balanced approach that includes protection of workers' rights, while fostering economic growth is essential and is important in achieving inclusive and sustainable development. So that's how you could conclude this answer in a positive and optimistic note, and that will help you create a good impression about the answer. So the next very important question that we are going to discuss is about a scheme of regional connectivity, regional air connectivity, not just regional connectivity, a scheme for the regional air connectivity, which is Udan scheme. So Udan means Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik, right? So that is the scheme. So you can see here Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik, and Udan is a regional connectivity program. So Udan is a regional connectivity program. So in this context, we'll discuss about this particular program. So what is the need for expanding the regional air connectivity in India? And in this context, discuss the government's Udan scheme and its achievements. So what should be the approach of this particular question? So the approach is that discuss the importance of regional air connectivity in India in the introduction, and then so you can discuss about the scheme called Udan scheme. What is this Udan scheme in the introduction, right? And then you need to discuss the need for expanding regional air connectivity in India, and then discuss the Udan scheme and achievements of Udan scheme, and ultimately you can conclude this answer. Now in the introduction, as I have already told you, that Udan is a regional air connectivity program. So Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. So in India, Ministry of Civil Aviation has unveiled the regional air connectivity scheme. So it has launched the regional air connectivity scheme, and it was also known as Udan Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik in June 2016 to primarily improve the regional air connectivity, making air connectivity more and more viable, or increase regional air connectivity, and that also increases ease of doing business in India. And this particular scheme aims to make flying more affordable, promote tourism, and also increase employment opportunities in India. So regional air connectivity is very important for a country like India, because so with regional air connectivity, generally what happens, you can save a lot of time. So you can save a lot of time, and the difference between the railways and the airways in India is that there is a lot of private sector presence in the Indian airways, right? So because of the private sector presence, there are a lot of companies who are competing for the market share, for the greater market share. So this competition has resulted in the lower fares, the lower air fares by the different companies, right? So different private companies who are into the market. So that has resulted in more and more affordability, better quality of services by these private companies. So therefore the Udan scheme essentially aimed at promoting regional air connectivity, because it is very important to promote the economic growth. The cities are engines of economic growth. So regional air connectivity even connect the smaller cities as well, and it reduces regional disparities, it improves access to essential services, and it also supports employment, reduce congestion at the major airports in India. So because of that particular reason, Udan scheme or regional air connectivity is very, very important in India. So with this objective, Udan scheme was launched in the year 2016. Now what is the need for expanding regional air connectivity in India? So why we need to expand regional air connectivity? So what we have to why it is important, because it would promote the economic growth in India. So we all knew that cities are known as engines of economic growth, so because majority of the GDP is from the urban areas. So therefore they are engines of the economic growth. So expanding regional air connectivity, connecting or linking these different cities, can access to remote areas, can enhance, can improve access to these remote areas, so thereby driving economic development through increased business opportunities, tourism, and even trade as well. and it also promotes or support employment opportunities as well, because regional air connectivity can boost job creation in the aviation sector as well as in the hospitality and trade and transport logistics as well. So it improves the accessibility as well. So when it comes to the accessibility, many regions in India, particularly tier 2 and tier 3 cities, remain underserved by air transport, thereby limiting their accessibility to the rest of the country. Now as of now, so most of the tier 2 and tier 3 cities are not well linked, they are not well connected. So but through regional air connectivity schemes such as UDAN, so it would substantially improve connectivity to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So they remain underserved by air transport, limiting their accessibility to the rest of the country, and thereby improving connectivity can actually bridge this particular gap. And in fact it also reduces regional disparities as well. Now what does it mean when it comes to reducing regional disparities? So air connectivity can help ensure development reaches all parts of the country, including remote and even underserved regions across the country, and it makes air travel more and more affordable. It would be more viable. It increases the competition in the aviation sector, and improving connectivity, saving time. That also improves ease of doing business in India, right? So connectivity is key for the economic growth and economic development and inclusive growth and development. So therefore the overall objective is growth and development of tier 2 tier 3 cities through improving connectivity. Now what are the achievements of the Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagarik scheme that was introduced in the year 2016, right? So there are certain objectives. The scheme was launched by the Ministry of Civil Aviation, that we all knew. This scheme aimed at improving the regional air development, airport development, regional cities connectivity, enhancement of regional connectivity. And in fact UDAN is also part of the National Aviation Policy of 2016, because the government has launched National Aviation Policy in the year 2016, and it was part of the National Aviation Policy, and this scheme is also applicable for at least 10 years. And the scheme has also it has also been provided a fair amount of air connectivity to tier 2 tier 3 cities. Now we could say that as of now this particular scheme has not resulted in a significant improvement in regional air connectivity, but we could say that there is to some extent attempts and efforts by the union government, state governments to improve regional air connectivity in tier 2 tier 3 cities. Identification of new greenfield airport projects, so new airstrips are being built, and new flights are being introduced into tier 2 and tier 3 cities as part of this UDAN program to make the airfares are more and more affordable, connectivity is improved, and also transform the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And the number of operational airports have also gone up to 141 from 74 in the year 2014, and 68 unserved destinations, that includes 58 airports, 8 helicopters and 2 water aerodromes have been connected under the UDAN scheme as well. So in fact 425 new routes were initiated. UDAN has also provided air connectivity to more than 29 states and union territories across the country. More than 1 crore passengers have availed the benefits of this particular scheme. So ultimately, in the conclusion, developing airports, incentivizing airlines, pooling resources, both the union and state governments can accelerate the harmonized growth of Indian civil aviation sector. So that would be equitable and inclusive, right? So that's how you could conclude this answer in a positive and in an optimistic manner, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. We'll discuss few more questions in the next lecture, and if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.